My parents forgot my birthday for the 5th time in a row. I thought I'd gotten used to it by now, until 2 weeks later, they threw my sister a huge party and gave her a brand new car. That was the final straw for me. When I decided to cut them off, I expected some backlash, but I wasn't prepared for the insane chain of events that followed. It all started with my 23rd birthday. By now, I should have known better than to expect anything from my parents. For the last 4 years, they had completely forgotten my birthday. No calls, no texts, not even a half-hearted, "oh, we thought it was next week" excuse. Each time it happened, I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need the validation. But deep down, every year, I hoped it would be different. This year was no exception. I spent the day pretending it was just another Tuesday. I went to work, answered emails, and sat through meetings where I barely heard a word anyone said. My phone sat next to me on my desk, its screen glaringly blank every time I glanced at it. As the hours ticked by, that tiny sliver of hope I'd been clinging to began to wither. By the time I got home that evening, I'd resigned myself to another birthday spent alone. My friends at work had surprised me with a cupcake and a candle during lunch, which was sweet, but it wasn't the same. After dinner, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and stared at my silent phone. I told myself I shouldn't be surprised. This was just who my parents were. 2 weeks later, Emma had turned 16. The difference between her birthday and mine was like night and day. My parents went all out, booking a private room at a fancy restaurant and inviting dozens of family members and friends. They even hired a photographer to capture the evening. I wasn't planning to go at first. After being forgotten yet again, the last thing I wanted was to sit through a celebration that would only remind me of how little I mattered to them. But Emma called me the night before, practically begging me to come. "Please, it would mean so much to me," she said. Emma and I had always been close, despite the glaring favoritism from our parents. It wasn't her fault they treated her like the golden child, and I didn't want to take my frustration out on her. So, against my better judgment, I showed up. The party was everything you'd expect for a sweet 16. Twinkling lights, an extravagant cake, and a DJ spinning pop hits. Everyone was laughing, drinking, and showering Emma with compliments about how beautiful and grown-up she looked. My parents were the picture of doting parents, practically glowing with pride as they moved from guest to guest, bragging about Emma's achievements. The real gut punch came toward the end of the night. My dad tapped his glass to get everyone's attention and launched into a heartfelt speech about how proud they were of Emma. He talked about her kindness, her intelligence, and how excited they were to see what the future held for her. "And to show you just how much we believe in you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we have a little surprise." My mom stepped forward, holding a set of car keys. "It's parked outside, sweetheart," she said, her smile radiant. Emma's jaw dropped, and for a moment, the room was completely silent. Then she burst into tears, rushing forward to hug our parents as everyone applauded. I stood frozen at the back of the room, clapping awkwardly as my stomach churned. They had gone all out for her, pulling out every stop to make her feel loved and special. And me? They couldn't even be bothered to send a text. When the applause died down, Emma came over to thank me for coming. "Isn't it amazing?" she gushed, practically bouncing with excitement. "I can't believe they did this for me." I forced a smile. "Yeah, it's great," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. But as I drove home that night, my smile faded. The more I thought about the party, the angrier I got. It wasn't just about the car or the party. It was about what those things represented. My parents had gone above and beyond to show Emma how much they cared, while I was left to celebrate my birthday with a cupcake from my coworkers. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my frustration had boiled over into something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't the first time they'd treated me like an afterthought, but it was going to be the last. Something had to change, and I wasn't going to wait for them to figure it out. That night, I made a decision. I was done being the forgotten child. If they couldn't see my worth, then I'd have to show them in the only way I knew how, by walking away. Growing up with Emma as my sister was like living under a spotlight that never pointed in my direction. She was the golden child in every sense of the term. My parents called her their miracle baby because she came along 8 years after I was born, long after they thought they were done having kids. I didn't mind at first. I adored Emma. As her big brother, I loved doting on her and watching her grow. But as the years went on, it became clear that Emma wasn't just their miracle. She was their everything. My parents poured all their energy, attention, and resources into her. They signed her up for every extracurricular under the sun: ballet, piano, horseback riding. You name it, she did it. If Emma wanted it, Emma got it. Meanwhile, I was left to fend for myself. When I was younger, I didn't notice the imbalance as much. But by the time I hit middle school, it became impossible to ignore. I wanted to take guitar lessons once, and my parents told me they couldn't afford it. A week later, Emma came home with a new pair of custom-fitted riding boots for her equestrian lessons. They always justified it by saying things like, "You're older. You understand how tight things are right now," or "Emma's just a kid. She needs these experiences to grow." The material things were one thing, but the favoritism extended far beyond that. I'll never forget the Christmas when I saved up for months to buy myself a secondhand laptop for school. I was so proud of myself for finally saving enough. Then, on Christmas morning, I watched as my parents surprised Emma with a brand new MacBook, complete with a fancy carrying case and accessories. I felt my stomach drop as I sat there with my refurbished laptop, wondering why I was expected to work for things that were handed to Emma on a silver platter. It wasn't just about the laptop, it was the principle. My parents didn't even consider that maybe I could have used a little help too. And it wasn't just the gifts. It was the way my parents treated our achievements. When I got straight A's in high school, they barely acknowledged it. "That's great, bud," my dad would say before turning the conversation back to whatever Emma was up to. But when Emma brought home a participation ribbon from a school art fair, my mom framed it and hung it in the hallway. I tried to convince myself that this kind of favoritism was normal. Parents always spoil the youngest, my friends would say when I vented about it. I'd nod along, pretending I believed it. But deep down, it felt like more than that. It felt personal. By the time I got to college, I'd started to distance myself emotionally from my parents. I still called home and visited during the holidays, but I stopped expecting them to show up for me the way they did for Emma. I thought maybe if I kept my head down and focused on my own life, the sting of their favoritism would fade. But the car incident shattered that illusion. Watching them go all out for Emma's 16th birthday, while my own had been forgotten for the 5th year in a row, was a wake-up call. This wasn't just about parents spoiling the youngest child. It was about their choice, over and over again, to put Emma on a pedestal while leaving me to figure things out on my own. As much as I wanted to blame Emma for benefiting from their favoritism, I knew it wasn't her fault. She didn't ask to be the golden child. It was a role my parents had created for her. But that didn't make it any easier to watch her get everything I'd ever wanted. Not just the material things, but the love, attention, and pride that I had spent my whole life chasing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that their behavior had shaped me in ways I hadn't even recognized. It made me hyper-independent, always reluctant to ask for help because I knew it wouldn't come. It made me doubt my own worth, questioning whether I was ever good enough to deserve the kind of love they so freely gave to Emma. But worst of all, it made me angry. Angry at them for playing favorites, angry at Emma for thriving in the role, and angry at myself for still caring so much about their approval. Looking back, I think the car was the final straw because it wasn't just a gift, it was a symbol. It represented everything I'd ever felt about being second best in my own family. It was my parents saying loud and clear that Emma was the one who mattered. And sitting there at her party, watching them hand her the keys, I realized I couldn't keep doing this to myself. I couldn't keep sitting on the sidelines, hoping for scraps of love and attention that would never come. That night, as I drove home from her party, I made a decision. I was done living in Emma's shadow. If my parents couldn't see my worth, I would have to find it for myself, even if that meant walking away from them altogether. The days after Emma's birthday party were a blur of anger and frustration. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head, my parents fawning over her, their faces glowing with pride as they handed her the car keys. It wasn't just the car or the party. It was the stark reminder that I didn't matter to them the way she did. I'd sat at that table, surrounded by family and friends, but I might as well have been invisible. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that my parents' favoritism wasn't new and that I'd survived this long without their validation. But this time it felt different. It wasn't just a forgotten birthday or a missed milestone. It was a pattern that had gone unchecked for years, culminating in that night, where their actions spoke louder than words ever could. A few days later, my mom called, and I almost didn't answer. I wasn't in the mood for a casual chat, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally realized how hurtful her actions had been. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her voice as cheerful as ever. "How are you doing?" I rolled my eyes, leaning back against the kitchen counter. "I'm fine," I said flatly, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "So," she began, her tone shifting to something more hesitant. "I wanted to talk to you about something. We're trying to figure out how to cover Emma's car insurance, and we were wondering if you could pitch in for a few months. Just until we get everything sorted out." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Are you serious? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and anger. You forgot my birthday for the 5th year in a row, but now you're asking me to help pay for Emma's car? Oh, come on, she said with an exasperated sigh. Don't be dramatic. You know how tight things are for us right now. You're older and doing fine on your own, but Emma is just starting out. We're trying to give her the best start we can. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to keep my composure. Mom, this isn't just about the car. It's about everything. How you spent my entire life prioritizing Emma while I've had to figure things out on my own. You keep telling me I'm independent, but did you ever stop to think about why I had to be? Because you weren't there for me. Her response was as dismissive as ever. We've always done our best for you, she said. Just because we've been more focused on Emma lately doesn't mean we don't love you. Lately? I repeated, laughing bitterly. This has been going on for years, Mom. Every time Emma needed something, you found a way to make it happen, no matter the cost. But when I needed help, I was told to suck it up and deal with it. And now, after all of that, you're asking me to help pay for her car? Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds? Look, I don't want to fight with you, she said, her voice edging into irritation. We're family, and families help each other out. You've always been the responsible one. We just thought you'd understand. Understand? I snapped. No, Mom, I don't understand. I don't understand how you can keep treating me like an afterthought while bending over backward for Emma. And I don't understand why you think I'd be okay with that. I ended the call before she could respond, my hands trembling as I set the phone down on the counter. My mind was racing, replaying the conversation over and over again. Her refusal to acknowledge my feelings, her casual dismissal of my pain. It was the final nail in the coffin. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the silent phone on my coffee table. For years, I told myself that things would get better, that my parents would eventually realize how unfairly they'd treated me. But now I knew the truth. They weren't going to change. Their favoritism wasn't a mistake or a phase. It was a choice. They had chosen, time and time again, to put Emma first, to prioritize her needs and dreams over mine. And I couldn't keep pretending it didn't hurt. The next morning, I called my parents again. This time, I didn't hold back. I told them everything. How much their actions had hurt me, how invisible I felt in my own family, and how their constant excuses had worn me down over the years. If you can't start treating me like I matter, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat, then I'm done. I'm not going to keep bending over backward for people who don't care about me. My mom's response was as predictable as it was infuriating. You're being so dramatic, she said, her tone laced with irritation. Emma didn't ask for any of this. You're just jealous because she's closer to us than you are. That was the moment I knew there was no fixing this. Their refusal to take responsibility, their constant gaslighting, it was more than I could take. That night, I packed a bag and decided I was done. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. And even though it hurt, I knew it was the right decision. Deciding to confront my parents was one of the hardest choices I've ever made. For years, I'd swallowed my feelings, convinced myself that if I just tried harder, they'd eventually see me the way they saw Emma. But after our last phone call, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. I needed to lay it all out, even if it meant burning bridges. I texted them, asking for a family meeting. My mom replied almost immediately with a cheerful, "Of course. We'll see you Sunday." I could tell she thought it was just a casual catch-up. My dad didn't reply, and Emma sent a thumbs-up emoji. None of them knew what was coming. That Sunday, I walked into the living room where so many family gatherings had taken place, feeling like a stranger in my own home. My parents sat on the couch, side by side, with Emma curled up in the armchair next to them. They looked so comfortable, so oblivious, that for a moment I almost chickened out. But then I remembered how much their actions had hurt me, and my resolve hardened. I sat down across from them, my heart pounding. "Thanks for meeting me," I started, my voice steadier than I expected. "There's something I need to say, and I need you to hear me out." My mom tilted her head, her smile polite but puzzled. "Of course, sweetie. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and launched into it. I told them about the forgotten birthdays, the blatant favoritism, the way they always prioritized Emma while treating me like an afterthought. I didn't hold back, recounting the countless times I'd felt invisible, dismissed, or outright ignored. "When you gave Emma that car," I said, my voice shaking, "it wasn't just about the car. It was the final reminder that no matter what I do, I'll never matter to you as much as she does." The room was silent for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understand. But then my mom rolled her eyes and let out a frustrated sigh. "You're being selfish," she said, her tone sharp. "Emma's 16. She's at a critical point in her life. You're 23. You're an adult now. It's not our fault you're not as close to us as she is. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not as close to you? I repeated, my voice rising. Do you even hear yourself? You've spent years pushing me aside, and now you're blaming me for it? How am I supposed to feel close to you when you've made it clear I don't matter? My dad shifted uncomfortably, looking like he wanted to disappear. Look, he said, his voice low, we didn't mean to make you feel that way. But things have been tight financially, and we've had to make some tough choices. Tough choices? I said, incredulous. Like throwing Emma a huge birthday party and buying her a car while forgetting my birthday 5 years in a row? Don't tell me it's about money, Dad. This is about priorities. Emma, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke up. I didn't ask for any of this, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't ask for the car or the party. I didn't ask to be treated differently. Her words caught me off guard. As much as I wanted to be angry at her, I knew she wasn't the one I was upset with. I know it's not your fault, I said, my voice softening. But you have to understand how it feels to be on the other side of this. To watch you get everything I've ever wanted while I'm left to figure things out on my own. Emma looked down, her expression unreadable. My mom, however, was not backing down. We've always done our best for both of you, she said firmly. If you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who needs to reevaluate things. Her words sealed the deal for me. I realized in that moment that they weren't going to change. No matter how much I laid out my pain, no matter how clearly I explained their favoritism, they would always find a way to justify it. I stood up, my heart pounding. If you can't start treating me like a part of this family, I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat, then I'm done. I'm not going to keep bending over backward for people who don't care about me. My mom's face hardened. You're making a mistake, she said. Family is family. You don't just walk away from that. Watch me, I said, grabbing my jacket. That night, I went back to my apartment and started packing. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I knew I couldn't keep putting myself in a position where I felt unloved and invisible. I needed space to figure out who I was outside of their expectations, or lack thereof. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself, and even though it felt like my heart was breaking, I knew it was the right thing to do. Going no contact with my parents felt like stepping into uncharted territory. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reaching out, checking in, or trying to bridge the gap they created. I didn't text them or answer their calls. In fact, I blocked their numbers altogether. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but after years of feeling like an afterthought, I knew I had to prioritize my own mental health. At first, it felt empowering. I finally had control over my boundaries. There were no passive-aggressive comments to brace for, no excuses to explain away. I told myself I was free from the constant cycle of neglect, favoritism, and guilt. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence started to feel less like freedom and more like an open wound. A nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered questions I couldn't silence. Do they even notice you're gone? Do they care? Were you ever important to them in the first place? Emma, on the other hand, didn't stay silent for long. A week after I walked out, she sent me a text. This is getting ridiculous. Why won't you answer Mom and Dad's calls? They're really upset. I stared at the message for a long time before putting my phone down without replying. A few hours later, another message came through. Family is forever. You're only hurting yourself by cutting us off. Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. Cutting off my family wasn't easy, and there were moments when it felt like I was hurting myself more than anyone else. But then I'd think about all the years I'd spent chasing their approval, only to be met with indifference. I couldn't go back to that. Not for Emma, not for anyone. My parents, on the other hand, were completely silent. They didn't call, text, or email. Part of me wondered if they even noticed I was gone. Were they giving me space? Or had they already written me off as the dramatic, ungrateful child who wasn't worth the effort? That silence hurt more than anything Emma said. It felt like confirmation of everything I'd feared growing up, that I didn't matter to them as much as Emma did. I told myself their indifference was proof I'd made the right decision, but deep down, it still stung. To cope, I threw myself into work and leaned on the few close friends I confided in. They were supportive, reminding me that I deserved to be treated with respect, even by my family. It's not selfish to prioritize your happiness. My best friend Sarah told me over coffee one afternoon. You're not obligated to keep people in your life if they only bring you pain. Her words were a lifeline. I clung to them every time I felt the urge to unblock my parents' numbers or reply to Emma's guilt-ridden texts. But as the weeks passed, the doubts didn't fully go away. I wondered if I'd overreacted, if there was some way to repair the relationship without sacrificing my own well-being. Maybe I should have given them another chance to explain themselves, to apologize. Maybe I'd been too quick to walk away. One night I almost caved. I sat on my couch, phone in hand, debating whether to call my mom. But then I remembered her dismissive words during our last conversation. "You're being selfish. It's not our fault you're not as close to us as Emma is." The anger and hurt came rushing back, drowning out my doubts. I wasn't the one who needed to apologize or make amends. If my parents wanted me back in their lives, they would have to show me they were willing to change. Until then, the silence would have to be enough. Eventually, I started to find peace in the quiet. Without the constant pressure of trying to please my parents, I had time to focus on myself for the first time in years. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with, and even started seeing a therapist. Therapy was a game changer. It helped me unpack the years of resentment and self-doubt I'd been carrying, giving me the tools to rebuild my confidence and set healthier boundaries. My therapist reminded me that cutting off my parents wasn't a failure. It was an act of self-preservation. By the time the 2-month mark rolled around, I felt stronger than I had in years. The doubts still crept in from time to time, but they no longer consumed me. I wasn't ready to forgive my parents, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. But for the first time, I felt like I was finally living for myself. And that was enough. For now. 2 months had passed since I cut off my parents. I'd blocked their numbers, ignored Emma's guilt-laden messages, and avoided family gatherings. For the first time, I was focusing on myself, trying to piece together who I was outside the role of the less important sibling. But one Saturday afternoon, my fragile sense of peace was shattered when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My friends knew I valued my quiet weekends, and I hadn't ordered anything that might require a delivery. When I opened the door and saw my dad standing there, my stomach sank. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and he avoided eye contact. "Can I come in?" he asked after an awkward silence. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "What do you want, Dad?" His eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of vulnerability. "We need to talk," he said. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He walked into my small apartment, his eyes darting around like he was seeing it for the first time. I gestured to the couch, and he sat down gingerly, like he wasn't sure he belonged there. He started by apologizing for forgetting my birthday. "We didn't realize how much it hurt you," he said, his voice low. "Things have been hard for us lately, and I guess we just dropped the ball." I stared at him, trying to gauge whether he was being sincere. His words felt hollow, like they'd been rehearsed. "You forgot my birthday 5 years in a row," I said, my tone flat. "This wasn't a one-time mistake, Dad. It's a pattern. And it's not just about my birthday, it's about everything." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We never meant to hurt you," he said. "We love you, but sometimes life gets complicated. Emma needed more help, and we thought you'd understand." His words made my blood boil. "Understand?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What exactly am I supposed to understand, Dad? That you prioritized Emma's needs over mine for years? That you made me feel like I wasn't important? That you forgot my birthday, but managed to throw her a huge party and buy her a car? Emma's situation is different," he said, his tone defensive. "She's younger, more vulnerable. You've always been independent, strong. We thought you didn't need as much from us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So because I didn't need you, you decided I wasn't worth the effort?" I said, my voice shaking. "Do you have any idea how hard it's been to figure everything out on my own? How much it hurt to watch you pour everything into Emma while I had to fend for myself?" He looked down, avoiding my gaze. "We were just trying to do what was best for both of you," he mumbled. "No, Dad," I said, my anger giving way to exhaustion. "You were trying to do what was best for Emma. You didn't even think about me." The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought he might finally acknowledge what I'd been saying, but instead, he doubled down. "We made sacrifices for Emma because we wanted to give her a chance to succeed," he said. "It wasn't about playing favorites. It was about doing what we thought was right." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Did I not deserve the same? Or were you so busy taking care of Emma that you forgot I existed?" He finally looked up, his expression pained. "You've always been capable, stronger than you realize. We thought you'd be fine without us hovering over you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Well, you got your wish," I said. "I figured it out on my own. But don't sit there and act like that was some grand plan. You didn't help me because you didn't think I needed it. and now you're trying to rewrite history to make yourself feel better. My dad opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop him. I don't need more excuses, Dad, I said. I've spent my entire life hearing them. What I needed was for you to show up, to treat me like I mattered. But you didn't. And now you're here, trying to smooth things over, so you can go back to pretending everything's fine. That's not why I'm here, he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Isn't it? I said, standing up. You didn't come here because you care about how I feel. You came here because you want me to fall back in line, to go back to being the dutiful son who doesn't complain when he's left out. Well, I'm done, Dad. If you and Mom want me back in your lives, you're going to have to prove you're willing to change. Until then, I'm not interested. My dad stared at me, his face a mix of guilt and frustration. We don't want to lose you, he said quietly. Then maybe you should have thought about that before, I replied. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, my dad stood up, his shoulders slumping. I hope you'll give us another chance, he said. We'll figure this out. I didn't respond as he walked to the door. When it clicked shut behind him, I sank onto the couch, my chest tight. The conversation had been draining, but it had also solidified something for me. I wasn't the problem. If my parents wanted to be part of my life, they would have to meet me halfway. Until then, I wasn't going to let their guilt trips or justifications pull me back into a relationship that left me feeling invisible. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't done healing, but I was finally moving in the right direction. After my dad left, I sat in silence for what felt like hours, replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. Something about it didn't sit right. His apology had felt forced, like it was more about easing his own guilt than addressing the hurt they'd caused me. But it was more than that. Why now? Why, after years of neglect, were they suddenly trying to patch things up? The timing felt too convenient. My dad had seemed desperate, almost panicked, like there was something more going on beneath the surface. I couldn't shake the feeling that their sudden interest in making amends wasn't about me. It was about something else entirely. That night, I decided to dig deeper. I pulled out the box of old family documents I'd stashed away when I moved into my apartment. Inside were years of papers, birth certificates, tax returns, insurance forms. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I figured if there was something they were hiding, it might be buried in this mess. After an hour of sifting through the papers, I found it, a bank statement in my parents' name. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but one line item caught my eye, a large payment marked Emma's tuition. My heart sank as I stared at the amount. It wasn't just a few $100s. It was thousands. I felt a wave of confusion and anger. Emma had always told me she was on a full-ride scholarship. She bragged about it at family dinners, telling anyone who would listen how her hard work had paid off. So, why were my parents making massive payments for her education? I couldn't let it go. I grabbed my phone and texted Emma, "We need to talk. Now." She called me within minutes, her voice wary. "What's going on?" "I found something interesting while going through old documents," I said, keeping my tone steady. "A bank statement showing a payment for your tuition. Care to explain?" There was a long pause. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was defensive. "That's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I pressed. "Because as far as I know, you've been telling everyone you're on a full-ride scholarship. So why are Mom and Dad paying thousands of dollars for your school?" Her sigh crackled through the phone, filled with frustration and guilt. "Okay, fine," she admitted. "The scholarship, it wasn't real. Mom and Dad made it up because they didn't want people to know they were covering my tuition. They've been taking out loans to pay for everything." Her words hit me like a freight train. For years, my parents had cried poor whenever I asked for help, insisting they couldn't afford to support me. And all that time, they've been secretly funneling money into Emma's education, even going into debt to do it. Why would they lie about it? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "They didn't want you to feel bad," Emma said softly. "And they didn't want me to feel guilty. They wanted to make sure I had every opportunity." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So they lied to protect your feelings," I said bitterly. "Meanwhile, they left me to fend for myself, telling me to figure it out every time I needed help. Do you have any idea how messed up that is?" Emma didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask them to do it," she said. "I didn't want them to take out loans. They insisted. They wanted to make sure I didn't have to struggle." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I couldn't blame Emma for our parents' choices, but that didn't make it hurt any less. "Do you even realize how unfair this is?" I asked. "They've spent years prioritizing you, making sacrifices for you, while treating me like I don't exist. and now they're drowning in debt because of it. I didn't know it was this bad, she said quietly. They never told me about the loans. Of course they didn't, I said, my anger bubbling over. They've been lying to everyone, including you. But you still benefited from it, Emma. You've gotten everything handed to you while I've had to work for every scrap. Do you even understand what that feels like? I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I really am. I never wanted things to be this way. Her apology was genuine, but it didn't erase the years of pain and resentment I'd been carrying. It's not your fault, I said finally, my voice softening. But that doesn't make it okay. Mom and Dad made their choices, and now they're paying the price for them. I can't be part of this anymore. Emma sighed. I get it. I really do. I just hope you'll give them a chance to fix things. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to forgive them, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. For now, all I knew was that I needed space to process everything I'd learned. As I hung up the phone, I stared at the bank statement in front of me, the numbers blurring together. The truth had finally come out, but instead of bringing closure, it had only deepened the divide between me and my family. For the first time, I realized just how far apart we drifted, and how much work it would take to bridge the gap, if that was even possible. I didn't ask them to do it, Emma repeated, her voice trembling over the phone. I never asked for any of it. Her words hung in the air, heavy with guilt and frustration. I wanted to believe her, but the truth was, it didn't really matter whether she had asked or not. My parents had made their choice, a choice to sacrifice everything for her while leaving me to fend for myself. Do you even hear how that sounds? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They wanted to make sure you had every opportunity. What about me, Emma? Didn't I deserve the same? Or was I just supposed to figure it out because I was independent? Emma sighed, the weight of my words settling over her. I don't know what to say, she admitted. They always told me you were strong, that you didn't need the extra help. I didn't realize how much they were putting on you. I let out a bitter laugh. You didn't realize because you didn't have to. You were busy getting everything handed to you while I worked 2 part-time jobs to pay for school. And now I find out they're drowning in debt because of it. They never told me about the loans, she said softly. I thought they had it under control. Well, they didn't, I snapped. And now they're trying to drag me into it, asking me to pitch in for your car insurance while they're paying off your tuition. Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? There was a long pause before Emma spoke again. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I didn't see how unfair it was until now. Her apology caught me off guard. For years, I'd resented Emma for benefiting from our parents' favoritism, even though I knew it wasn't entirely her fault. Hearing her acknowledge it, even just a little, was more than I'd ever expected. It's not your fault, I said after a moment, my tone softening. But that doesn't change the fact that Mom and Dad screwed up. They put you on a pedestal and left me in the dust, and now they're paying the price for it. After we hung up, I sat in my living room, staring at the bank statement I'd found. The anger that had been burning in my chest since my dad's visit hadn't disappeared, but it was mixed with something else now. Pity. My parents had spent years prioritizing Emma, bending over backward to give her everything they thought she needed to succeed. And in doing so, they'd sabotaged their relationship with me. It was hard to feel sorry for them, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that their choices had come back to haunt them. I thought about how much they'd sacrificed for Emma, taking out loans, working extra hours, lying to protect her feelings. And for what? To end up in debt and estranged from their other child? Their favoritism had cost them more than they realized, and I wasn't going to let myself get caught up in their mess again. That night, I sat down and wrote out everything I'd been holding on to. The forgotten birthdays, the favoritism, the constant feeling of being less important. I wrote about how much it hurt to be told I was strong enough to manage on my own while watching them pour all their love and resources into Emma. When I was done, I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to send it to them, to lay everything out in black and white and force them to confront the damage they'd done. But another part of me wondered if it would even matter. Would they listen? Or would they dismiss my feelings, just like they always had? In the end, I decided to keep the letter for myself. It wasn't about them. It was about me. About finally acknowledging my pain and giving myself permission to let go of the resentment that had been eating away at me for years. For the first time, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I wasn't sure what my next step would be, or if I'd ever fully forgive my parents. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep carrying the weight of their mistakes. They'd made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. And for the first time in my life, I was choosing to put myself first. After everything I had uncovered, the forgotten birthdays, the favoritism, the lies about Emma's tuition, I knew I needed to confront my parents one last time. I wasn't looking for closure or reconciliation anymore. I just needed them to hear the truth, raw and unfiltered, so they couldn't keep pretending they hadn't done anything wrong. When I called to tell them I was coming over, my mom sounded cautious but hopeful. "We'd love to see you," she said, her voice carefully upbeat. My dad's voice in the background was muffled, but unmistakably tense. They knew this wasn't going to be a pleasant visit. I arrived that Sunday afternoon, my stomach in knots. The house looked the same as it always had, but stepping through the door felt different. I wasn't their son coming home anymore. I was someone who had finally seen through the facade and wasn't afraid to call them out on it. We sat in the living room, the air thick with tension. My dad sat stiffly on the couch, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, while my mom perched on the edge of her seat, her eyes darting nervously between us. I stayed standing, pacing a little, trying to collect my thoughts. "I'm not here to make things easier for you," I began, my voice calm but firm. "I'm here to say what I need to say. After this, it's up to you whether or not you choose to listen." My mom opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Let me finish." I took a deep breath and began laying everything out. I told them how much it hurt to have my birthday forgotten year after year, while Emma's milestones were celebrated with parties, gifts, and glowing speeches. I reminded them of all the times they brushed off my achievements while bending over backward to support Emma. "And then there's the lies," I said, holding up the bank statement I'd found. "For years, you told me you couldn't afford to help me, that I was strong enough to figure it out on my own. Meanwhile, you were secretly taking out loans to pay for Emma's tuition and pretending it was a scholarship. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" My mom started crying, her hands shaking as she reached for a tissue. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. We wanted to give Emma the best chance in life." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I stared at her, incredulous. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Did I not deserve the same? Or did you decide I wasn't worth the effort because I didn't need as much hand-holding?" My dad finally spoke up, his voice low and defensive. "It wasn't about playing favorites. You were always the independent one. We thought you'd understand." "Understand?" I repeated, my anger boiling over. "Understand what, exactly? That you prioritized Emma's future over mine? That you made me feel invisible for years and justified it by telling yourselves I was fine on my own? How is that supposed to make me feel?" They didn't have an answer. My mom wiped at her tears, her eyes fixed on the floor, while my dad just sat there, his face tight with discomfort. I stood there, waiting for something, an apology, an acknowledgement of what they'd done. But the silence stretched on. Finally, my mom whispered, "We thought we were doing the right thing. And you were wrong," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "You made choices that hurt me deeply, and instead of owning up to them, you've spent years pretending everything was fine. Well, it's not fine, and it never will be unless you're willing to take responsibility for the damage you've done." Neither of them said anything. Their silence was all the confirmation I needed. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I can't keep pretending to be part of a family that doesn't value me. I deserve better than this, and I'm not going to settle for less." As I turned to leave, my mom called out, her voice desperate. "Please don't go. We love you, we really do." I paused at the doorway, looking back at them one last time. "If you really loved me," I said quietly, "you would have shown it." And with that, I walked out of their house and out of their lives. The drive home was a blur. My chest felt tight and tears stung my eyes, but there was also a strange sense of relief. For years, I had carried the weight of their favoritism and neglect, hoping that one day they'd see me for who I was. Now I finally understood that their approval wasn't something I needed to chase anymore. That night, as I sat in my apartment, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty or suffocating, it was peaceful. For the first time, I felt like I was free. It's hard to believe it's been a year since I walked out of my parents' house for the last time. At first, I wasn't sure if I'd made the right decision. Cutting off family, even when it feels necessary, leaves a strange void that's hard to explain. There were moments when I questioned myself, wondering if I'd overreacted or if I'd regret my choice. But over time, those doubts began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Therapy was my first step toward healing. Talking to someone who could help me untangle the mess of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, was more freeing than I could have imagined. My therapist helped me see how much my parents' treatment had shaped me, not just in the obvious ways, but in how I approached every aspect of my life. I'd spent so much time trying to prove my worth to them that I'd forgotten how to value myself. Week by week, session by session, I started to let go of the resentment. Not because I forgave them, but because I didn't want to carry their mistakes with me anymore. Their inability to see my worth wasn't a reflection of who I was. It was a reflection of their own flaws. One of the most unexpected parts of moving on was reconnecting with friends. For years, I'd isolated myself, convinced that no one would understand what I was going through. But when I finally opened up, I was met with nothing but kindness and support. Sarah, my best friend since high school, became my rock during those first few months. She'd always been there for me, but I hadn't let her in for a long time. When I told her everything about the forgotten birthdays, the favoritism, the final confrontation, she didn't try to sugarcoat things or dismiss my feelings. "That's a lot to carry," she said one night over coffee. "But I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. It takes courage to walk away, even when it's what's best for you." Hearing those words made me realize just how much I'd been carrying on my own. I started leaning on my friends more, and in turn, they reminded me of my worth. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild the confidence my parents had chipped away at for years. Work was another area of my life that changed for the better. I left my old job, which had felt like a dead end, and found a new position at a company that genuinely valued its employees. My new boss was supportive, my co-workers were kind, and for the first time I felt like my contributions mattered. A few months into the job, my manager called me into her office. I was nervous at first, thinking I'd done something wrong, but she smiled warmly as she handed me a small bonus. "You've been doing incredible work," she said. "I just wanted to let you know how much we appreciate you." Those words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't used to being appreciated. Not at work, not at home, not anywhere. But in that moment, I realized I was finally in a place where I was seen and valued for who I was. Emma and I have started to rebuild our relationship, though it's been a slow process. She reached out a few months after I cut off our parents, apologizing again for her role in everything. "I know I can't undo the past," she said, "but I want to try to be a better sister." Her words felt genuine, and I could tell she was trying. We started talking more often, meeting for lunch every few weeks. It's not perfect, and there's still a lot of hurt to work through, but I can see she's making an effort. As for my parents, I haven't heard from them since that final confrontation. At first, their silence stung, but now I see it as a blessing. They've made their choices, and so have I. I'm not angry anymore. I've let go of that, but I also don't feel the need to let them back into my life. For the first time in years, I feel free. Free from the weight of their expectations, their favoritism, and their neglect. Free to build a life that's entirely my own. I've started picking up hobbies I abandoned years ago, like painting and hiking. I've made new friends, taken spontaneous road trips, and even started dating again. Every day feels like a step toward the life I've always wanted, a life where I'm happy, fulfilled, and loved for who I am, not for what I can do for others. Looking back, walking away from my parents was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it was also the best. It forced me to confront my own worth and realize that I didn't need their validation to be whole. Now, when I think about the future, I don't feel weighed down by resentment or regret. I feel hopeful, excited, and free. And for the first time in a long time, I can honestly say, I'm happy.